Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you both for being here and testifying. Who's going to go first? Representative Ramthun, and then we'll hear from Senator Strobel.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Honored again to be here today with Senator Strobel, the dynamic duo. Chairman Wickers and members of the Assembly Committee on Constitution and Ethics, thank you for holding a public hearing today and allowing me to testify in favor of Assembly Joint Resolution 16, which seeks to apply to Congress for an Article 5 convention for the purpose of introducing an amendment which would impose term limits on members of Congress. Many of the Founding Fathers held the belief that these positions were not meant to be held for long periods of time. Imposing term limits on members of Congress would be of great benefit to our system of government for a multitude of reasons, but I will only speak on two specific ones. First, term limits would allow for more public participation within government. Over the past few decades, incumbents have had a massive advantage over challengers when it comes to re-election. Due to this advantage, many people choose not to run against incumbents at all. Term limits would produce more open seat elections, enticing people to run for office and providing voters with numerous candidates to vote for, instead of just the same few over and over. Second, term limits would allow for fresh perspectives in Congress. When people have been in any system for too long, they inevitably conform to it. Congress is no different. We're seeing that now more than ever in Washington, D.C. When people are in positions of power for too long, they stop working for the people and start working for influence, favor, prestige, money, and themselves. By limiting the amount of terms someone can serve in Congress, it would allow for those positions to be consistently refreshed, with new individuals untainted by the system. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is just human nature. Imposing term limits on Congress would help prevent such corruption, or the effect of that, and return the power of governments to the people. Thank you again for holding a hearing on Assembly Joint Resolution 16 and allowing me to testify in favor. Senator Strobel.
Good morning. Thanks for having me here. I'll just follow up a little bit to what Representative Ramthun was talking about, and I think there's really two things we need to talk about as it pertains to this joint resolution. First off, what it's going to do, and secondly, how it's going to do it. And I think Tim covered very well about what it's going to do, and I think when we look at what goes on in a place like Washington, D.C., and the swamp that it is, and you see the power of special interests and how so many politicians seem to forget who they represent and what they're really there for. You know, it's very concerning. I think the statistic is incumbents win over 90% of the time, and I think that is very telling in itself. Now, I understand you need some institutional memory, and you need some period of time where people can actually get their feet on the ground and understand the system. But when you've got people that are serving, a lifetime, as we see in way too many instances, I think that that's a problem. And yeah, there's elections, and they're always up for election. But again, unfortunately, money is very powerful in our political system, and the longer they are there, the more affiliations they have with special interests, the more money they get, and the more money they get translates to more infallible they are in the next election. And I do believe that with some reasonable term limit, and I'm not talking about cutting people too short, but something reasonable, that I think we'll have more independent thinkers, and they'll be less influenced by special interests and more so thinking about the people that they represent. And I see that as a problem. Now, just getting into how we do that with the Article 5 Convention. Article 5 Convention, of course, allows 2/3 of the states to apply for a convention whose very specific constant purpose is amendment of a specific and limited scope. And that is how they are sent to this convention. And if they deviate from that scope, they will have lost all ability to make any decisions, and they will be recalled by their state. That's at least how I know we are crafting our resolution for the Article 5 convention. It's different than a constitutional convention. There's two very different things. This is an Article 5 convention. It's not a constitutional convention. Constitutional convention is such that it could be wide open, and I certainly don't want that, and I don't think hardly anybody, if anybody that supports this resolution wants that either. This is an Article 5 convention, which is very specific in its nature. And then, of course, once it would go to that convention, we can't forget, it has to be then ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures. So, there's checks along the way on this process. I know there's, certainly a faction out there that thinks that an Article 5 convention can just spin out of control and become a constitutional convention. That's really what the crux of, I think, this whole debate is here today, amongst the pros and cons, it would appear. But I feel very comfortable that our framers of our Constitution, who certainly were geniuses and provided us an unbelievable document for our government, I don't see any reason why all of a sudden when it comes to Article 5, how they kind of screwed this one up. I don't see that. So I see that it's a very good method to use to begin to even the tables between the people and our government and the states and federal law. So those are my thoughts on Joint Resolution 16.
Very well done. Thank you. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for testifying today. So you're proposing a federal term limits amendment here. Have either of you authored or proposed term limits here in the state of Wisconsin?
I have.
You have?
I haven't yet.
Very good. When was that introduced?
When?
Yeah.
Every session I've been here.
Okay. All right. I'm not familiar with it. So, okay. Thank you.
Can I add a follow-up to that, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
I do appreciate the question, Representative Murphy, and on a personal note, I don't see this initiative that I'm participating in as limited just to Congress. I think the roles of public service are servant roles, and they should not be long in duration for a lot of the reasons I stated in my testimony, and allowing for the variety of the people to participate will bring in fresh view, fresh attitude, the lack of learned behavior and status quo that will enhance the effectiveness of government. So that's why I support it here, and I'm not done. So I'm glad you asked the question, because if there is a bill that I can create in conjunction with Senator Strobel to address non-congressional public service, I'm all for it, because the problem exists at every level in government, even at school boards.
Sure.
People in there too long, and then things happen a certain way, and a person will vote a certain way, and it unsettles the other members, and they all go along to get along because they don't want to create conflict. I don't think that's healthy for government processes. I don't think it's healthy for our republic. Thank you for the question.
But just for clarification, this would only apply to federal officials?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Representative Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was listening to your commentary, it occurs to me that the problem you're defining is based on your opinion. I don't see a lot of data backing up what you claim. So I would assume there is some, that you've done something more than just search opinions and put this together. But it also occurs to me that the solution could be found in a reform of campaign finance, where people had equal access to finances to run their campaigns, because what I'm hearing is that you don't believe voters are choosing their representatives wisely, but based more on the fact that they've just been there and they've got a lot of money to finance their campaigns. So without questioning the voters' ability to choose who they would like to have represent them, I would rather see us go towards fixing the campaign finance laws so that people have equal access to money to run their campaigns. So I guess there wasn't a question in there, but a comment. And if you have data to back up your claims, I would be pleased if you would share it.
Sure. Well, I can
Thank you.
respond a little bit. I think I did give one statistic. Over 90% of all incumbents do win re-election. And I'm not saying that they aren't re-elected unwisely, but I think that the money that they oftentimes have gives them a advantage that's very difficult for a challenger to overcome. However, I certainly believe in the First Amendment and the right of free speech, and I believe contributing to those politicians is certainly everyone's right to do. Maybe it would work better for our system if they had every right to give that money to a different person every 20 years instead of the same person over 20 years. And if we're broaching on government financing of politicians, I don't think that's, well, it's not the topic here today, and it's not anything I think that's good for our democracy either.
Well, and I don't necessarily disagree. I would start by getting rid of Citizens United. But again, people maybe value experience. And there's something to be said for trusting the voters to choose who they want to be represented by. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Looking for a response?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I may. I'm compelled to express my opinion. I do appreciate the comments from Representative Pope very much. I really do. I agree with Senator Strobel in the regard that I think expanding financial capability for people to be equally funded through the government is probably not going to make the situation better. It will make it worse, in my opinion, because I think money is the root of the evil that causes much of what we have, dysfunction and otherwise, in government. The influence, the favoritism, the effect of dollars is the contributing factor, in my opinion. And on a personal note, I would tell you that when I look at myself in this servant role, and I'm a citizen servant, that's one of the biggest issues I have with this job. As you may know and may not know, but I'll be public right now and tell you, I'm not a big fan of the dollars situation. I don't want to get involved in the money because eventually, in my heart, I know it affects people in ways not meant by definition of the role for the service it's supposed to provide. It's supposed to work of, by, and for the people 24/7, 365. And when you influence in any way, especially through dollars, you change the outcome, you change the effect, and that changes the definition of the job. And I'm not going to go there. So I shy away from the dollars. So that's why I was attracted to this opportunity, because I wanted to be able to be in a position where we could identify that as being part of the problem, and hopefully we can address it through an amendment process. I would add that from an amendment perspective, the Congress itself has issued since 1789 over 12,000 amendment requests to the Constitution when the states didn't get the chance to do one. Of the 12,000, 33 were ratified. But the point is the states should be able to contribute in the process as well, and that's what this initiative addresses. It allows for the opportunity for this state to be part of a group that says we would like to have a voice in how we can structure the representatives we send to Washington to represent us, and that's what's good about this bill as well. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One more statistic here that I referenced in my testimony is 2013 Gallup poll, which 75% of respondents voiced their support for imposing term limits on members of Congress. So there's another statistic for you.
Thank you. Representative Cabrera.
Yeah, I have two questions. One of them is based on, I believe the senator made a comment about this not being a resolution for a constitutional convention. And so I would just like if you could explain further and elaborate on that, because it is a resolution to amend the Constitution. And so how do you distinguish the two? How is it not a constitutional convention if it's the purpose is to amend the Constitution? And then, how do you limit it to only that one issue?
Well, I would defer to Ledge Counsel, but just as a prelude, there's a Constitutional Convention, there's an Article 5 Convention. We're two very distinct things, and we're talking about an Article 5 Convention. And Ledge Counsel, would you be able to elaborate on that?
Sure. So I think if I understand the distinction you're making, it's not a convention to create a new constitution, but to amend the existing constitution as authorized under Article 5. Did you want me to?
Well, because the comment was made that it's not a constitutional convention, but it is, the whole purpose is to convene to amend the Constitution. So that's why I just wanted some clarification as to how that is not.
Sure. Yeah, I think different groups may use the terms somewhat differently. As I understand it, some of the proponents of Article 5 conventions will make a distinction between a full constitutional convention to sort of create a whole new constitution versus an Article 5 convention, which is formed for the purpose of proposing amendments, which then need to be ratified by 3/4 of the states.
Okay, and what the second half of that question was, how would it be limited? How do you prevent the convention from going beyond just addressing term limits?
Well, I think there's other people who can probably speak in greater detail on that. It'll be forthcoming, but you apply for a convention for the purpose of its very specific and limited scope. And if you go beyond that very specific and limited scope, in this case, it's only to discuss term limits. If there's anything broached at that Article 5 convention outside the parameters of dealing with term limits, it's out of bounds and that representative is recalled. That's my understanding of it. And I think we'll have other testimony coming forward.
And then my second question was sort of touches upon what Representative Pope alluded to is, what do you say to voters who actually want to re-elect the incumbent despite the number of years that they've been there, if you cut them off because of a term limit and that's actually who they want to continue representing them?
Well, I understand that argument, and I think we may lose some good people. But I think overall, it's going to be a lot healthier and better for the system. I don't think anyone's talking, maybe it's 20 years or what have you. I mean, what is a long enough period? And again, if you want to talk about what the voters think, the Gallup poll, 75% voiced their support for imposing term limits on members of Congress. So I think public opinion is there on the issue, and there are voters.
Okay, thank you.
Would Ledge Counsel be able to comment on Act 83?
Sure, yes. There was a question about ways in which an Article 5 convention might be limited in scope. There's a few potential ways it could be limited. One is in the language of the applications themselves, including in this joint resolution, there's a expression of the scope. There may be either in Congress's call for a congressional or a constitutional, an Article 5 convention, some parameters put in place. I know there has been legislation introduced in Congress in the past to do that. The convention itself, once convened, may adopt rules of procedure that may include some safeguards on limiting the scope. And then at the state level in Wisconsin, 2017 Act 83 created a process for appointing delegates to an Article 5 convention, and that act also included a prohibition that limits a Wisconsin delegate's ability to vote on what's defined as an unauthorized amendment, meaning something that's sort of outside the scope of the application. How any of those things would be enforced is sort of still would be somewhat of an open question, but so in other words, there would be various potential safeguards in the process.
Follow up,
Yes,
Representative
sir.
Ramthun.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. First, I would concur with pretty much everything the senator had stated. I'd like to just read again the relating to line on the bill itself. I think hits the question if you just think about it for a moment. Applying to Congress under the provisions of Article 5, which is the tool that says we can. The states can apply because Article 5 says you can, of the Constitution of the United States for a convention to propose an amendment. Not amendments, not multiple, not a convention of states. This is a convention to ask a specific question about a specific amendment. It's on the agenda, just like today. You legally and technically can't deviate off of your posted agenda because it's public, it's notice, and if you do, it's a meeting violation and it shuts everything down. The same thing would happen here. So again, it's the amendment to specifically establish term limits for members of the House of Representatives of the United States Senate, which is Congress. That's it. So it could be a really quick meeting. If everybody comes thinking it's a good idea, the convention process to address the one single amendment could be rather simple and rather clean, and it's not a convention of states. Thank you, sir.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what type of term limits are you looking for? I mean, length, what would you do?
I mean, that's up to the convention. Their charge is to come up with term limits, and how long or short that would be up to the convention. And then that would need to be ratified in the end, of course, by 3/4 of our states.
So as long as it's limited, you don't really care what it is?
That wouldn't be my job. It would be the job of the person who's representing our state that goes to the Article 5 convention.
So it could be 2 years or it could be 40 years.
Well, may I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good question. The mechanics of it have to use existing positions for math purposes. What I mean is the Senate, United States Senators are 6-year terms, so the number would have to be divisible by 6. So you're looking at, well, not 6, but let's start with 6, 12, 18, 24. Because 2 goes into all those numbers, and so does 4. So, well, not 18, but we're only talking about Congress, so it's 2 and 6. So it had to be divisible by 6. So 18 could work, 24 could work, 12 could work.
6 could work.
6 could, well, 6 could work, but I think it could work, but again, to the Senator's comment, I think that would be the convention body would say, well, that's not enough because you've got institutional knowledge and all that, so who knows? But
that's only speculation because you have no idea what.
Well, you're right, but it has to be divisible by 6 would be my comment, and how the chips fall would be the result of the convention, and a lot of people in that room a lot smarter than me. So, but that's my answer. Thank you.
So, just one follow-up question. Who does term limits advantage? Does it advantage the party with more money or less money? Do you think?
My first comment.
Or do you have any feeling on that?
Well, I don't. My focus is the people. The advantage is to the people and to our republic. And if the people think that what they have, party or otherwise, is what they want, they'll keep voting for that person up to the point when they can't, because the seat has to be open. But
well, that's fine. But that's not my question. My question was about whether there was an advantage to either party, and would it advantage a party with more money or less money?
I don't think advantage pertains to parties necessarily. I think it pertains to incumbents.
Representative Pope.
It's an interesting question.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your allowing this conversation to carry on because I've had some questions come up during our conversation. You mentioned, Senator Strobel, that should someone bring up a subject matter outside of the realm of this particular issue, they would be recalled. But is that immediate, or do you go back to your state and you lose your position? I mean, how does it affect the action that particular day of the vote?
I believe it's immediate, and anything beyond the scope of what they were authorized to appear for is null and void.
I concur.
So it is immediate, you just, okay, your vote doesn't count, go away?
That's the intent, and that's the way I believe it's drafted. So.
I concur.
And then, have you considered this? I have learned over the years, when we used to travel to other states and conferences and so on and network with other people, the states that had term limits, they just traded Senate and House of Representatives back and forth. Has it occurred to you that that might happen in Washington as well? So my 6-year term is up as a senator. So I trade jobs with the representative in my state or where I live. That happens a lot where term limits exist in states. What are you thinking to do to prevent it from happening in Washington?
If you could show me some specific statistics on that, I'd like to see that.
Me too.
Go to NCSL, ask about term limits. It happens all the time.
Well, you all the time isn't statistics.
Well, but this isn't my bill. I don't have to provide,
I'd
data
like
to
see
you.
statistics on that.
I can just vote no on the bill because that is an issue that concerns me.
Well, I'm not going to assume that as a factual statement, but if you can show me the stats, I'll look at it.
Representative Ramthun?
Yes, sir. That's a really interesting question. I can't, for the life of me, come up with any name of a senator who went from a senator to a rep. I can't. Yeah. No, in Washington. We're talking Congress. Well, in Congress, I'm thinking of,
That's what this bill's
I'm
about.
talking about 535 people.
I guess I'd like to see the statistics of how it's happening in these other states, before I could comment on that.
Let me make this clear, because I think it's a very interesting point. I do not know for the life of me of 535 people in Washington, D.C., if anyone has ever been a senator that became a rep. Usually it goes from rep to Senate or out, or some other position. So it's an interesting question, and I'm glad you asked it. I don't have any, to the senator's comments, there doesn't appear to be any information that suggests that has happened or would happen, but it's an interesting point. Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you for bringing the bill forward.